So when you're first working on a script or a story, the first thing you look at is what's known as plot structure. And plot structure is based around the idea of how you put your scenes together, how you put your story together. The first thing you need to figure out is your protagonist. Now, you probably learned about Protagonist and Antagonist back in elementary and middle school, but they taught you a very simplified version of it. I'm going to teach you the real version that you can use no matter what story it is, no matter how complicated the story is, and this will especially come in handy as you move through high school and college. Now, back in elementary school, your teachers probably explained protagonist as the hero or the good guy, and in most cases that's correct, but there are going to be some cases where you find a story where your protagonist is not necessarily good, or not necessarily a hero. For an example, you can look at anything written by Quentin Tarantino. So if the protagonist is not a hero or a good guy, how do you describe them? The protagonist is going to be the main character, and that's always going to be true whether they're a hero or not. Now, how do you know who the main character is? Try and figure out who you follow through the story. Who do you see the most? Who's in the most scenes? If you're watching a TV show or a movie, who gets the most screen time? That's going to be your main character. That's going to be your protagonist. For some of these terms, I'm going to be using my book. Why? Is it a shameless attempt to plug my book? Well, yes, but also because I know the story really, really well because I wrote it. So I can go into detail about what I was thinking when I created the characters. So your protagonist is going to be the person that you follow throughout the story the most. In my book that I wrote, the protagonist is the first person who gets the first line in the first scene of the book. It's the first person that they're introduced to, and I did that on purpose so that they knew this character is important, this character is somebody they follow along. And I didn't write a single scene that doesn't have her in it. If there's something that happens that she wasn't there for, we learn about it by them telling her. So what makes a good protagonist? Your protagonist doesn't necessarily need to be good, but they do need to be slightly likable. We want them to win. We want to follow them through the story. It needs to be somebody that we have an interest in. If we don't want them to win, or worse, we don't care whether they win or lose, it's going to be very difficult to get people to be interested in the story. Know your characters well. Know what they like, what they don't like, how they would react to certain situations, what kind of personality they have. So if your protagonist is your main character, the opposite is going to be the antagonist. Now, a lot of times, the same way that you learn that the protagonist is a hero or a good guy, the antagonist is described as a villain or bad guy, and that's not always the case either. So let's say your story is a romance. You have a protagonist who wants to date another character. There's somebody else who wants to date that same character, so they're working opposite of the protagonist. They may not necessarily be evil or a bad guy, but they're going to be your antagonist. So how do you know? The easiest way to figure out who or what your antagonist is to figure out what the main character wants, what the main character is trying to get. Typically, there's going to be something or someone who is stopping them from getting it. Now, I say the antagonist is whoever or whatever is stopping the protagonist from getting what they want, because sometimes you'll have a situation where the antagonist is not a person. Example, you have a little kid who's lost in the woods. What does the kid want? He wants to survive and get out of the woods and go home. What's stopping him? The environment, the woods, maybe there's a wolf trying to chase him, whatever. But there's no one bad guy, no one antagonist, but there's still an antagonist because the environment is the antagonist. This is what's known as man versus nature. You probably learned about that in middle school. So while the antagonist might not always be a person, there will always be an antagonist. If you have a story where there's nothing stopping the main character from getting what they want or need, you don't have a story. So, protagonist. Figure out who the main character is. Who do we follow through the story? Who are we rooting for? Who do we learn the most about? Figure out what they want or need. Who or what is stopping them? That's the antagonist. Every time, every single time.